So Little Dust is a thing that I started because I've been going into regional towns across Australia, and people were a little bit desperate for the Dharma, and they kept on giving hints like, "Oh, Bhante, you should come back soon. You should stay for the rains. Oh, Bhante, why don't you come and live here?" And it's like, whoa, we just met. Like we literally just met. And it showed me that there was an incredible thirst for the Dhamma, and I became aware of my privilege and the privilege of city-based Dhamma practitioners. So even in Australia, where I think access to the Dhamma is still quite rare and difficult, compared to somewhere like Thailand or Malaysia or Taiwan, we're a very small percentage of the population here, about 3%, it's very small. And yet it's quite easy to access the Dhamma in a city. And so, as I said before, there's Dharma things happening every night of the week, right? And there's Dharma places to practice. There's like physical buildings, there's real estate, and that matters. Because in country Australia, rural towns and rural communities, there is no real estate available. So there is no centre for practice. There is no place for people to go to. Because there's no place to go to, people don't gather. Because people don't gather, they don't connect around their spirituality, and their spiritual practice becomes slackened. And so sometimes it takes something like a visiting monk to bring the community together, and they get excited because they get in touch with something that really matters to them. And so the people I've been working with come from a variety of different backgrounds, mostly diaspora communities. So Sri Lankan, Thai, Cambodian, Burmese, Lao. These people, these brave people, have moved into what used to be white Australia. Like, I remember going to these country towns and being like, oh my gosh, where are the brown people? Like, up until relatively recently, actually. But they are there because it is easier for people to get PR, or because, some of these people have been there a long time. They just saw an economic opportunity to open a business, for example, or to work on the land and things like that. But there's these whole communities of people who don't get to practice the Dhamma, especially like they did in their home country. And there's a real sadness about that. I remember going to Newcastle and connecting with the Newcastle Buddhist community there, who are mostly Sri Lankan, the people who I was working with. And I got invited to a home a couple of hours away. This woman with 4 kids who had been waiting 8 years to offer food to a monk. She'd been in Australia 8 years. She hadn't had the opportunity to do this very basic cultural practice of offering food to the Sangha. It's a long way to travel to find a monk, right? To go to a temple. Australia is so big. And so there's people who kind of have these stories, went to Orange, and there's some people who've had a business there for many years. They said it's been 10 years since we last had a monk come to our restaurant. And when I was in Rockhampton recently, I met with a Thai community, and they came together again in a restaurant, and they were all so nervous. They invited all their friends. There's about 40 people there, for all ages, from little ones who they were trying to show how to bow, why, and things like that, and the older people. And they were also nervous about making a mistake because they couldn't remember what to do. It had been so long since they'd been able to practice. I was like, let's do some chanting, and they were all like, and they're like, oh, Bhante, we're worried, we can't remember. I'm like, you'll be fine. And it was. And some people had tears in their eyes because they were able to do this spiritual activity that they remembered having a good association with. They grew up going to temple, having fun, running around, eating lots of good food, doing Dharma service, looking after the monks. These things are very celebratory. In Australia, our Dharma centres tend to be very austere and museum-like, but in Asia, they're the centre of the town, the centre of the village. They're really active, vibrant places where people go to have a good time. And they do a lot of events, and it's all exciting. There's festivals, there's colour and movement. And so they miss that. And so to do these practices reminds them perhaps somewhat of their alienation from their home culture and also their alienation from their spiritual practice. So I decided that what I would do for the next couple of years is to live as a wandering monk and to go from place to place working with these communities. And I wanted to do that to let them know that they were meaningful to me and that I valued them and that I wanted to help them practice their spiritual path. In the city, I'm just another monk next to the great Bhante Sujato. I'm practically invisible. But out there, there are people, they really respect me for going there, and they really are very grateful, very sincerely grateful. Because great monks like Bhante Sujato, they don't have time for this kind of thing, right? And so I've really been enjoying going into these communities and connecting with them and forming these relationships. And I hope that they'll last a long time and that I'll be able to take other people, other monks and nuns to work with these communities too, so that they have access to the Dhamma. So one of the things that we do with Little Dust is we raise money. And this is not a pitch, I'm not asking you for money. We raise money to do things like hire community halls so that people can come together to practice. Because that cost is sometimes prohibitive to communities. They can't afford it. When I was in Rockhampton, we were meant to have a residential retreat at a caravan park. Rockhampton's pretty rough. We were going to Yeppoon, even more rough, to do a retreat in a caravan park, right? How lucky we are to have Vajrasala, right? And people couldn't afford to pay for that. So we had to change and we had to have a non-residential retreat. Sometimes people can't afford the service fee, I think, or the services fee. Like, sometimes organizations will charge a fee for things like food or electricity so they can cover their costs. Sometimes people can't afford to do that. Some people can't afford to go on retreats because they are on low incomes. If you're working as a casual, you have to take time out of your work, you don't get paid, and then you have to spend money on accommodation and food. So you go on a retreat, you might be spiritually more wealthy, but fiscally more poor. And this is a real barrier. And so not only do I increase access in terms of physical access to the Dhamma for communities, but also in terms of financial support. And although it's true that today we have things like free online Dhamma, a lot of these communities don't even know how to access that because they're just out of the loop. And a lot of the people I've been working with are not necessarily even Buddhist, but kind of like Buddhish. And they're interested in crystals. This is mostly the white Australians. They're interested in crystals, they're interested in occult stuff, they're interested in spirituality, but they haven't found a path. They're in the middle of rural Queensland, And we might think, oh yeah, we're creating so much access by having all this online Dharma and stuff, but it's so difficult to actually find something that is a good place to start even. And so with these people, when I've been working with them, like 93-year-old women who come from Christian backgrounds, who are interested in spirituality, or the kind of down and out dropouts who are interested in conspiracy theories and this kind of thing. Like, these are the people who I also work with, and so I call them the Buddhish, or the Buddh curious, or the Buddhist adjacent. They're not really Buddhists. And for me, going into these country towns, I've been talking so long, this has been one of the most rewarding and baffling things, because I'm not talking to Buddhists. It's easy to talk to Buddhists about Buddhism, right? Very difficult, very different experience for a monk talking to non-Buddhists about the Dhamma. They'll ask all the hard questions. They'll put you on the spot. They'll interrogate you. They'll tell you what they think. They'll give you, something from some other cultural, religious or spiritual tradition. And so this was kind of surprising and interesting for me, and really, really rewarding too. I mean, it puts you a bit on edge, but it also puts you on your toes. And it reminded me that the Buddha was not talking to Buddhists either. He was talking to people of all different backgrounds. And so I had to really adjust my teaching. I couldn't give them this kind of stuff. We just talk about very simple things. And we talk in the way that the Buddha gave that gradual instruction, starting with generosity and then ethical conduct, these sorts of things. And so you really had to think very differently about how I taught. But the thing that keeps me going towards those type of people, even though they're hard work, and for me it's quite challenging, there's no respect for the Sangha, for example. Very humbling experience. Sometimes I might not even eat because they don't understand that this is necessary. And they'll do all sorts of things like call me darling and sweetie and come up and give me a hug. Pardon? She did, yes. Yes, I've had it all. Love, sweetie, darling, mate. Yep. And all sorts of variations of my name. Anyway, so the thing that keeps me going with these communities is that because they're really passionate about spirituality and they're really looking for a spiritual path, when you talk to them about these really deep, profound truths, it has the ability to really kick them up onto a greatly different level of understanding. Whereas I find when I talk to my Buddhist communities, I could probably only help them a little bit because they already know so much, right? And so I see a lot of potential here with these communities because they're a little bit lost spiritually, a little bit lonely spiritually, and they don't have a lot of guidance. And so, if they continue in that direction with crystals and dolphin music, then they might not make as much progress if they hear even a simple basic teaching on the power of generosity. And so that's kind of an interesting thing for me going into these rural areas. I love the idea of camping. The reality, actually, yeah. Yeah, it's more the surrounding atmosphere, I think. So the place that I was in last, in Rockhampton, I had tried to tell them about what is suitable accommodation for a monk, but they booked me into this caravan park, which was like this amusement park for kids. There's like water slides, and there was all these teenagers doing knock and run at night and things like that. So of course going into these places I don't expect a monastery, I don't expect anything fancy, but It's kind of on edge. And so yeah, the experience of having a spiritual place to practice, it just doesn't exist there.
There's some national parks there, a lot of countries.
Yeah, that's true.
Because the community is not very big, you can have
Yeah.
3 or 4 camps.
And if you want to organise it, that's great. because it's very difficult for these communities to do that. They don't have experience of running retreats. I recently ran a retreat at a place called Molong. Was anyone on that retreat with me? Molong, no. Yeah, and this was my friend Chris from Central West Buddhists, which was a great inspiration for me to form Little Dust. He was a person who contacted me saying, I want to connect Buddhists in my area. And when he's talking about the Central West of New South Wales, he's talking about Bathurst, Dubbo, Orange, Wellington. These are like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of square kilometres, right? It's like 3-hour drive from Bathurst to Dubbo or something, you know? Like this is huge areas of land. And he's just wanting to connect these people somehow as a group. And there's a lot of people from very different backgrounds. And he was doing this for selfish reasons. He wanted to have a Dharma community for him and his children. He wanted to practice meditation. He wanted to have a group of friends.
But there's a Sri Lankan community in Dubbo.
There is, but the Sri Lankan community doesn't tend to connect with other communities. This is one of the problems in Australia. We have all these diaspora communities who want to have a cultural and language form of Buddhism because they're immigrants, they speak the language, the Dhamma is understood in that language, they want their children to learn that language, they have a cultural background, and that is the Dhamma. But they won't do that with other groups, you know. It's a problem. There's a cliff.
A couple of Sri Lankan families from Dubbo, they would actually come all the way to Santi.
That's right, and I've probably met them when I went out to Dubbo, but they wouldn't mix with the other communities. We did do one really good event actually, where we had a day of practice, and we had a bit of a mix. But apart from that, I didn't meet any other people from any other different backgrounds. I was invited by the Sri Lankan community, and I only met Sri Lankans. So we had these silos of practice. Anyway, so that's Little Dust. Oh, but Chris Molong, yeah. So Chris wanted a retreat. And I was like, well, you've got to organise it. I've never been on a retreat in my life. I was like, oh. So I helped him, I helped guide him, you know, what needed to be done. I did as much of the work that I could do myself, which is not, you know, the teacher's usual job. And we got some people together to come along. We found a retreat centre out at Molong, and I ended up getting COVID actually and couldn't go, which I felt terrible about because it was all my friends. And it was his first retreat. Anyway, he muddled through, and so he managed to give himself his first retreat and also give a community their first retreat together. So I thought it was pretty amazing. And then he managed to forget the pain of doing that, and we did another one. And he did it again, you know, he organised it, he did so much of the work for it. And this is what it takes. It takes these community connectors, people who are willing to do the hard work, which is why lately I've been really praising community connectors, people like Meredith and Bronwyn, who have been doing the hard work to get this place ready, people like Tina and Zen, who have been doing so much work bringing communities together for years, trying to get people, you know, into the Dharma in so many different ways, and who brought friends with them here. So, you know, these community connectors, people who are willing to do the work, without them, we would be really lost. And so those community centres, often they'll have 1 or 2 people who will contact the other people and bring them together. It's a really grassroots, word of mouth kind of thing. And, you know, the Bush Telegraph, they call it. And people find out, you know, that Thai community, gosh, they invited all the Thais in the city, you know, and that was really interesting to see how that happens. And I can't imagine it happening in a big city in the same way. So yeah, that's what it takes to do those kind of projects. And unless people are willing, then it becomes impossible. So in organising a camping event, someone's got to do that, right? Good luck to them. And so what I've been doing is just going into people's homes, going into cafes or restaurants, sometimes hiring a hall. If there's a retreat centre nearby, using that. Good luck in Australia. Anyway, I've been talking forever about Little Dust, but that's what I'm doing. And you can check out my adventures on my blog, on my website, Little Dust. And just to say that that word Little Dust comes from that story I told at the beginning of the retreat about the Brahma Sahampati, asking the Buddha to teach out of compassion. And the dust reminded me of the red earth of Australia. You know, it's kind of, thank you for asking that. Next month, I'm off to a place called Kalka. Kalka is, okay, that's South Australia, that's Western Australia, that's the Northern Territory. It's right there, just under the border of South Australia. And I'm going to a really remote community. It's 93 people. And it's an art centre. They have a little like art studio made out of corrugated iron and a few other bits and pieces. Half a bus, which is like where the things are stored and I'm going there to volunteer with 2 Dharma friends, and they're going to help me, because, you know, monks are a bit of a hard work, not when to eat, can't help ourselves. So they're going to help, and we're all going to volunteer at this place. We've been invited by a friend of ours who works there. And so this is part of my work for the Buddhist Council and is my own personal journey this year, especially with the voice, you know, really wanting to hear from our First Nations people, bring back that to you know, other people so that I can share what it is that they want us to hear. So I'm just going out there to volunteer, to listen, to learn, and apparently it's a very, very beautiful place, and I'll be there for almost a month. Yeah, right? And so this is the kind of thing that's possible with Little Dust, in that, you know, I'm not stuck in a particular place. I don't have responsibilities anywhere, so I can keep wandering.
You join the Flying Doctors?
I'm not going to join the Flying Doctors. I don't think it would be safe for me to either fly a plane or doctor. But I'm going as a monk, as a monk who is volunteering, and there was some concern actually about what the people would think of the monk. You know, I was actually asked, oh, maybe you shouldn't wear your robe, and it's like, well, I've got nothing else to wear. and so I'm going, and I think it'll be their first experience seeing a Buddhist monk. But from my other interactions with Aboriginal people, they're really interested in people who have a spiritual practice. And you might be aware that there is an Aboriginal practice called the Diri, which is like a mindfulness practice, an awareness practice. And I was speaking with Bhante Sujato about this the other day. He attended one of the Buddhist Council's recent events where we're talking to the community about the voice. And one of the Aboriginal elders there was saying that they were working at a girls' school, a boarding school for Aboriginal girls. And they had a lot of behavioural problems. And then they introduced this program of the Diri, this meditation, and all the behavioural problems vanished. Right? And so I'm hoping to learn some of these cultural practices as well. Yes, yeah, it's a country, it's alive, you know.